Hello, my name is Ann Johnson and I'm Associate Director of the Geotech Center. I'm working with Vince Denoto, our PI, and Tom Mueller, an Assistant Director of the Center, and we have been working on an educator certification. So this PowerPoint and presentation really focuses on the steps to provide educator certification and also to justify whether or not it is needed. While this session really focuses on certification, I want to look at different types of credentials that do provide evidence of an educator's expertise. So a credential is just a document from a recognized entity that specifies what an individual has attained. So it can be their qualifications or their competencies or what courses they've taken, but it is generally for a specific purpose. Academic degrees are one type of a credential. We're all familiar, I think, with bachelor's, master's, and PhD degrees and their documentation. Also, more and more certificates are coming on board where there are usually fewer units and length of time than a bachelor's degree, but a specific set of courses on a topic. The other one is certification, and the granting organization, whoever it is, and we'll talk more about that, says the person is competent to carry out specific tasks related to that entity. There's also teaching credentials that are required and often in secondary educational institutions, especially for specific topics. There's also licensure or licenses, and these are usually government issued. That's their entity that issues them, and they meet legal requirements generally to protect the public in some way. So why is documenting expertise important for educators? Specifically, why now and suddenly and today? Well, more and more new technologies are coming out, and they are related to different occupations, but they're not necessarily directly relatable to a specific academic discipline. So a new course may come out, but what department does it really fit in? And does that person who teaches or has that degree have the qualifications to really teach that course? And it's become a real issue. There's no credentialing for expertise for some of these courses at all, especially the newer technology ones related to computer science, cybersecurity, and other things. So the only way to acquire that credentialing is maybe to create a new academic degree, but that often is very costly and time-consuming, and it may not even exist for that particular academic discipline. I'm going to go through what we actually did for geospatial technology courses and geospatial educators. Geospatial technology is one of those that don't nicely fit into one discipline. So does it only fit in geography or computer science, environmental science, or many other disciplines? Well, it's being used more and more as a tool in many different disciplines. And that few academics actually exist now to provide a academic degree such as a bachelor's or master's. They do exist, but they're not necessarily in the same discipline. So discussions with geospatial educators and practitioners brought up the point that more and more places were requiring some sort of credentialing to provide evidence that people had the qualifications and expertise to teach in these courses. And so we came up with, what kind of proof do you really need to be able to teach geospatial technology? And how can that proof be acquired? What kind of credential? I want to talk about two different types of credentialing. They really have very similar names and they're often confused. That's a certification and a certificate. Certificates are generally awarded by completing a specific type of program at an academic institution. They can be stackable certificates where you maybe have them at 3 units or something and you stack several of these together to make a full certificate. Or they can be a certificate that requires 16 to 18 units, but generally they're less than a bachelor's degree, but they still will be conferred within a discipline. Certification, on the other hand, is a process that provides some sort of official documentation, and they're usually organized via an organization, and the organization is usually made up of peers that do that type of work, and they understand what type of expertise a person has to have in a subject or a discipline in order to become certified. But there are many different formats or structures for certifications. They may be test-based, so you have to take some sort of exam and pass it at some level. It can also specify some number of years that you have to have doing that particular job before you can become certified. It may require you to take one or more courses within the certification program, and generally they require some sort of ethics statement. There is generally a fee for them, both for maybe applying to take the exam and then one for the exam itself. And often these certifications are not lifetime certifications, but they need to be reviewed, say, at an interval of 3 to 5 years. I'm going to talk about some steps that we used, the Geospatial Technology Center of Excellence, for educator certification for geospatial educators. But I think it really could apply to just about any discipline. And I'm going to go through some steps that we took and may be useful to you. The first step was really that preliminary research about certification, or what type of credentialing was needed. We actually brought together subject matter experts. So this was both industry, organizations that do certifications, and educators that are teaching the courses. And we asked them, what kind of proof do you need to document your expertise? Is certification or some type of credential even needed? And if we give you certification or provide certification, will your institution even recognize it? We also had to determine what an educator would have to know in order to become certified, and also what processes or structure that certification needs to have in place. We also did research on other certification programs and looked at really how they ran, how their structure, the amounts they charged people for certification, and different requirements. When we had this all put together, we actually acquired supplemental funding through our existing grant by writing a proposal that had these answers and requesting funds for a pilot program from the NSF. We actually then had to do a certification pathway, and we had to design it for use by educators. So we looked at everything we learned from the forum and our research, and we really determined that it needed to be limited to educators. There were already professional certification programs out there for working professionals, but they really didn't fit educators. We determined that it probably should not be exam-based, because we wanted not only to know their expertise, but they also in the technology, but also pedagogy. We also didn't want to have a set number of years of experience. It's hard to get experience if you're not allowed to teach something without a credential, and you can't get a credential without some minimum number of years. We also want it to be based on skills and competencies needed by geospatial technicians or technologists. And we wanted to understand where the gaps were in educators' education. So we asked them to do self-assessments, and I'm going to show you some of the things we asked them. We determined too that we wanted to demonstrate what a course would look like, what the content would be, and include the pedagogy and the other activities within it, so that we were not only giving them background information and expertise on the geospatial technology, but we were actually demonstrating best practices in producing that type of course. So we had activities and quizzes, as well as using appropriate pedagogy. We developed a pilot certificate pathway and content, and we continue with more and more research all the time. So we developed that application and a rubric for people to participate in this pilot program. We identified the knowledge and skills, and we had them take self-assessment tests. We chose a management system, and we used Canvas, a learning management system. We developed a MOOC, or content, and we did it at the intro level, which was a very broadly based type of course. And we had a timeline and uploaded it all into our learning management system. We also, at each step of the pilot pathway, we actually had a survey that surveyed whether or not they thought it was good content, what problems there were, and suggestions for possible solutions. We developed a code of ethics, much like the professional code of ethics, and the process for awarding that certification. We also scheduled a forum at the end of the pilot just to really review with all of the participants what they liked, what they didn't like, any suggestions as we move forward. We did continue research as, what kind of long-term hosting organization should provide this certification program. And you really have to look at a business model to run it. How do you develop the content for it, as well as to review applications and review outcomes, and long-term if there's going to be renewals. We also wanted to look at other research background things, and we had them not only do the self-assessment, but we had them do what is a Q test study, where they actually looked at what they perceived were the things that should be taught in a geospatial program versus what users or the industry says should be used and taught. We also looked at whether or not we should find a way to provide them units toward continuing education, whether undergraduate or graduate level. We also included the whether we should include badges or micro-credentials as incentive for along the way until they got their full certification. So here's the pathway. This is step 6. So it was based on the content of the SME and our research, and this is just the bare bones. If you want more details, please do contact me. But we created an application and the self-assessment. We created a MOOC and focused on geospatial technology. We had what that we call concept modules that they had to review. So these were important concepts that educators should be aware of and should understand fully. And then we had them, as a proof rather than an exam, create a capstone project that really used all of the things that they had learned in the MOOC and the concept modules and be usable by other educators. At that point, we had a process for signing a code of ethics and awarding a certification. This is the personal assessment. We had 190 different skills and competencies, and we asked each person at the beginning of the pilot project to rate themselves. And these are anonymous, so just put what you really feel like your knowledge level. So give yourself a 0 if you're unaware, aware 1, 2 a novice, 3 proficient, and 4 experts, and fill it out for all 190 things. And because nobody else is looking at it, really try to be as honest as you can. The results were just aggregated as a whole to really help us define where there were gaps in knowledge, where our MOOC should really stress different topics or concepts. We then asked them to fill it out again afterward and to see if we'd filled in some of those gaps, or were there still some gaps in their knowledge level. Now, this is just showing you that initial gap analysis. So different knowledge areas and looking at the values that these educators had put in on that scale of 0 to 4, you can see some of them are doing fairly well. They were feeling fairly proficient, where others were pretty low, 1.59 say for remote sensing. And that told us that maybe we needed to hit those concepts a little bit harder in the MOOC. We also looked at institution level. So whether you were in middle and high school or post-secondary community college or four-year institution, and looked at how they rated themselves. So for the pilot, we had funding for 20 educators to go through the pilot. We had an overwhelming response to people wanting to participate in the initial certification program. So we had 62 apply. We got additional funding so we could do 32. Of those 32, 2 of them, I believe, dropped out fairly early. And we had selected those applicants that really covered those with less experience to more experience. So we kind of expected there would be some difference in completion rates. But 22 did finish the pathway and were awarded certification. We also asked the participants at the final thing, have they used their certification for anything? And many of them said yes, that they had used it. It did allow them to do things on their campus or at their institution that they wouldn't have been able to do without the certification, but it did also give them recognition and an understanding of their expertise. We got additional funding now for 2 more cohorts, and they will be participating again in this fall and then again in the spring, and each of these will be helping us to finalize our pathway and create resources. I hope this has been informative, and please do contact me, Ann Johnson, at the Geotech Center. Thank you.